It's around 4 in the afternoon in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Thick smoke from forest fires in the Amazon turn day to night, turn cityscape into vision of Armageddon. And that is what environmental campaigners are describing this as. The National Institute for Space Research in Brazil has recorded an enormous spike in fires in the rainforest so far this year as compared to last. The majority of the fires were started intentionally as deforestation fires or to manage farmland. In other words, the record numbers of fires are a result of record levels of deforestation. Trees and scrub cut down back in May or June, left to dry and then set alight.
Why fires increased so much compared to last year, same period, is because deforestation is increasing. Just simple like that. So if someone says, oh, but you know, it's the drought is generating all of that. No, it's not the drought. I mean, it's basically because we increased deforestation.
So, why increase levels of deforestation? In a word, politics. Last night, a major climate conference in the Brazilian city of Salvador. The Brazilian environment minister takes to the stage. He would have flown over the fires to get here, and some in the crowd reacted to him like this. The reason for this reaction, his boss. The so-called Brazilian Trump, Jair Bolsonaro, took over as president in January. He has started to dismantle the framework in place, which was successfully regulating levels of deforestation in the country. Yesterday, he said that disgruntled charities angry about funding cuts were deliberately starting the fires.
Regarding the fires in the Amazon, I am under the impression that it could have been set by the NGOs because they had asked for money.
Today, he said he didn't say that.
I have not accused the NGOs. I said suspect.
The Brazilian government is devoting considerable resources to combating the fires and is defending its environmental record. But according to NGOs on the ground, the problem is that signals from Bolsonaro are green-lighting more and more deforestation.
The perception that the environment is not very much worth it, I think it gives the signal to the people on the ground that they can do whatever they want and they won't be caught.
The rainforests produce 20% of the oxygen in the Earth's atmosphere. That's why they call it the planet's lungs. Over the last 24 hours, the planet is having a coughing fit.
Well, joining me now in the studio is Anthony Pereira, Director of the Brazil Institute at King's College University, and from Washington, D.C., Michaela Weiss, Manager of the Global Forest Watch. Welcome to both of you. Michaela, if I can start with you, you've been documenting the scale of this damage. How bad is it in Brazil, and is it at all reversible?
Yeah, so what we're seeing is an increase in fires compared to last year and the past few years. But I think the important thing to keep in mind is that this is only the beginning of the fire season. So we're just seeing this now in August, but actually the peak normally occurs in September and October. And so what happens over the next 2 months is critical to see if this is really a record-breaking year.
So it could get worse?
Yes, it definitely could get worse.
Okay. Anthony Pereira, how much is this about Bolsonaro's attitude? I mean, he believes that Brazil doesn't owe the world anything on the environment.
Well, I think the statements made in your package are accurate, that some of this, probably not all of it, but some of it is a result of signals being sent by people in the government, including the president. I mean, the good news is that there is an infrastructure in place in Brazil to curb illegal deforestation. Illegal deforestation, or deforestation in general, came down a lot, about 80% between 2004 and 2012, but it's creeping back up again, as the specialist said.
But how much is that directly attributable to the current government?
Well, Bolsonaro on the campaign trail was more anti-environmental than he is now. He was saying he was going to put the environmental ministry in the Ministry of Agriculture, and he was going to pull out of the Paris Agreement. He didn't do either of those two things. So this pattern that we see today of him walking back and trying to soften what he said before is, we've seen that with other things that he said. And so he has been, as president, slightly less combative than he was on the campaign trail. But I think the signals are still being sent out there.
Michaela, we're hearing a lot about the politics here. Are there any ways to stop this deforestation apart from the obvious political solution?
Well, certainly, there's a big role that law enforcement can play in actually going and, trying to prevent some future change from happening. And there's many groups on the ground, indigenous communities and local communities, who are also working very hard to stop this threat.
Anthony Pereira, we heard Bolsonaro yesterday talking about NGOs being to blame. He's rowed back on that today. What do you make of that? What does that tell us about the kind of politics he's employing?
Well, I think he's hearkening back to an earlier period in Brazil's history where there was a lot of concern about maintaining control over the Amazon and this fear that foreign entities would try to take the Amazon from Brazil. He's harking on that a little bit. And I think, he's maybe generalizing, because I'm not sure that in the rest of in the total population that this feeling that NGOs are the villains is necessarily widespread. In fact, there was a poll in mid-August that suggested that a majority of Brazilians, even a majority of Brazilians who voted for Bolsonaro, think that the government should do more to curb illegal deforestation. So I'm not sure that gap is so big between what the NGOs are trying to do and what the Brazilian population wants.
Yeah, and you talking about illegal deforestation there. Michaela, what sort of impact is it having on indigenous people in Brazil?
Yes, so we've documented several instances where illegal deforestation is coming into indigenous territories. The most recent one that we've seen is in the Atuna-Itata Reserve in Pará, where there's actually a lot of deforestation coming into the land of a previously uncontacted tribe. So definitely a lot of potential risks there for that tribe, as well as many others in the Amazon.
What sort of pressure do you think can actually be asserted over Brazil? I mean, we've seen Germany and Norway have pulled out contributions. The impact of that from Bolsonaro, sort of discrediting them, pointing out that Norway engages in whale hunting itself. So can any international pressure really be applied?
I think so. I think it's important to remember also that within Brazil itself, there are important voices, critical voices, so that when the director of the space agency was fired by this government, a number of important scientific organizations within Brazil said, this is not good. This is a government that sounds like it's anti-science. So I think there can be linkage between groups outside of Brazil and groups within Brazil to try to focus on this as not as a left-right issue, as an ideological issue, but as an issue of science and of survival of the planet and survival of humanity. Because I think that's really what it is, what the issue is.
But there is potential for an EU trade deal to be jeopardised here too, isn't there?
Yes, and I think that's a concern in Brazil as well. I'm sure that there are communications between representatives of agribusiness and this government saying, please don't endanger the recently signed trade agreement between Mercosur and the EU, because we don't want these environmental issues to be used as a reason to block Brazilian access to the European market, which is very important to it.